You know that incredibly common, almost universal situation where you feel completely fine, you go to the doctor for a routine checkup, and suddenly you are handed a piece of paper telling you there is a silent danger lurking in your blood. You walk in feeling vibrant and healthy, and you walk out feeling like a ticking time bomb because of a single word on that page, which is cholesterol.
That happens to a lot of people. It is a very jarring shift in perspective. To be told your body is doing something dangerous without giving you any warning signs at all, well, it immediately puts you on the defensive against your own biology.
Welcome to TalkKast. It really is a strange experience. I mean, over the decades, we have essentially turned cholesterol into a comic book villain. We treat it as this completely toxic substance, like a biological mistake that our bodies would just be better off without entirely.
Right? People look at that piece of paper and think, if I could just get this number down to 0, I would be perfectly healthy.
Exactly. But if cholesterol is supposedly so inherently dangerous, why does our liver actively manufacture it every single day?
That is the fundamental contradiction we have to resolve, because it exposes the biggest misunderstanding right away. Most people hear the word and immediately picture clogged arteries and heart attacks. But cholesterol is actually a waxy, fat-like substance found in every single cell of your body.
Wait, every single cell?
Every single one. It is not a poison. It was part of the basic machinery of life. Your body actively makes it because you literally need it to stay alive.
Tell me more. What is it actually doing inside the cells? Because basic machinery sounds a bit vague for something we're constantly trying to eradicate.
Well, it serves several vital roles, starting with your cellular structure. Every cell, whether it is a brain cell, a skin cell, or a heart cell, has a membrane. That membrane needs to be strong enough to hold its shape, but fluid enough to let nutrients in and waste out.
That makes sense.
Right. And cholesterol embeds itself into those membranes to provide that exact structural balance. Without it, your cells would either be too rigid and crack or too fluid and melt away.
I find that fascinating. We never hear about that structural role. I think people separate cholesterol from the rest of their bodily functions entirely.
Exactly. And beyond structure, it is the foundational building block for crucial hormones. Testosterone, estrogen, cortisol, all those steroid hormones do not just appear out of nowhere.
I see. So they actually come from cholesterol.
Yes, they all depend on cholesterol as their base raw material. It sits right at the foundation of your entire endocrine system. Furthermore, your body uses it to synthesize vitamin D when sunlight hits your skin.
I had no idea about the vitamin D connection.
It is essential for that. And it also helps produce the bile acids in your liver that you need to digest and absorb fats from your food.
So the body is intentionally manufacturing this substance because without it, our digestion, our hormone production, and our basic cellular integrity would completely shut down.
That is exactly the case.
If that is true, then the substance itself is innocent. I have heard it described using a cargo and vehicle analogy, which seems helpful here. The cholesterol itself is just the cargo, like essential supplies.
That is a highly accurate way to visualize it.
Right, and because it is a fat-like substance, it does not mix well with blood, which is mostly water. It cannot just float around on its own, so it needs a delivery vehicle to travel through the bloodstream. And those vehicles are the lipoproteins.
Yes, and that distinction between the cargo and the vehicle matters immensely. When people use the terms good cholesterol and bad cholesterol, they are actually talking about those transport vehicles, not the cholesterol itself.
That is a huge distinction.
It really is. The cholesterol cargo inside them is biologically identical.
So what makes one vehicle good and another bad?
Well, LDL, which is typically labeled as the bad vehicle, is responsible for carrying the cargo out from the liver to your body's tissues. HDL, the so-called good vehicle, acts more like a biological vacuum cleaner.
Like it sweeps things up.
Exactly. It helps carry excess cargo away from the tissues and brings it back toward the liver to be recycled or removed. The core issue is not that the cholesterol cargo exists. The issue is when you have too many of the wrong vehicles carrying too much cargo through your arteries for far too long.
I get the general idea that having too many vehicles causes a traffic jam. But I want to push back on that a little, because a traffic jam in the blood does not explain a heart attack.
That is a fair point.
If this cargo is essential, how exactly do the delivery vehicles end up becoming lethal? What is the actual mechanism of harm happening inside the blood vessel?
It comes down to where those vehicles end up. The inner lining of your blood vessels is a very delicate single layer of cells called the endothelium. When you have highly elevated numbers of those LDL vehicles circulating in the bloodstream, Some of them crash into that lining.
They crash and just bounce off.
No, they actually get trapped inside the artery wall itself.
So they essentially leave the highway and get stuck in the ditch.
Precisely. And once they are trapped inside the artery wall, they undergo a chemical change called oxidation. You can think of it like the LDL particles are rusting.
Rusting? That sounds terrible.
It is. Your body's immune system detects this oxidized, rusted LDL and recognizes it as a foreign threat. So it sends in white blood cells, specifically macrophages, to clean up the mess.
That sounds like the body is doing exactly what it's supposed to do. I mean, it's cleaning up an injury. Why does that lead to plaque?
Because the macrophages get overwhelmed. They gorge themselves on the oxidized cholesterol until they become swollen and toxic. We actually call them foam cells.
Foam cells. I get what you mean.
Eventually, these foam cells die right there inside the artery wall, leaving behind a necrotic, inflammatory core of cellular debris and fat. Over years and decades, this process repeats, and that buildup is what we call plaque.
But wouldn't you feel that happening? I mean, think about a clogged pipe in a house. As the buildup of grease or hair gets worse, you start to notice the water draining slowly.
Like the pressure drops.
Exactly. Wouldn't there be warning signs early on, like sluggishness, fatigue, or a mild chest pain, while this plaque is slowly building up over 20 or 30 years?
That is the most dangerous myth of all. And the plumbing analogy is exactly why people get confused. Human arteries are not rigid copper pipes.
What are they then?
They are living, flexible tissue. When plaque first starts to build up, the artery actually expands outward to accommodate it. This is a process called positive remodeling.
Wait, it expands outward?
Yes, because the artery bulges outward first. The actual channel where the blood flows remains completely wide open and unrestricted for a very long time.
That is a sobering thought. So the pipe is getting thicker walls, but the water is still flowing at full speed.
Exactly. Because the blood flow is not restricted early on, high cholesterol has absolutely no obvious symptoms. You can feel perfectly healthy, completely energetic, and entirely normal, while this inflammatory plaque is silently building up in your arteries for decades.
That explains a lot. It does not announce itself at all.
Not until it is an emergency.
So if you cannot feel the buildup, how does it suddenly become a heart attack?
A heart attack is usually a sudden event caused by the plaque breaking open. The plaque has a fibrous cap covering it, keeping that toxic, necrotic core separated from the flowing blood.
So there is a protective lid on it?
Basically, yes.
Yeah.
But inflammation can weaken that cap. If the cap ruptures, the toxic core is suddenly exposed to the bloodstream. The body immediately treats this rupture like a massive traumatic injury and forms a blood clot to try and seal it.
And I imagine that clot is what causes the blockage.
That is the key point. That clot can form in a matter of minutes, suddenly and completely blocking the blood flow. If that happens in an artery feeding the heart muscle begins to die. That is a heart attack.
Since we cannot feel this process happening and the consequences are so severe, it makes sense that we obsess over the things we can control. And usually that means staring with suspicion at everything on our dinner plate.
Food is where people look first.
For decades, the public was told to aggressively avoid dietary cholesterol. We literally threw away our egg yolks. But is a morning egg really the culprit driving this biological cascade?
This is where we need to look closely at the mechanics of human digestion, rather than outdated public health messaging. For most people, consuming dietary cholesterol like the cholesterol found in an egg yolk does not directly translate into high cholesterol levels in your blood.
Wait, I have to stop you there. For 40 years, the entire medical establishment told us to avoid eggs and shrimp. Are you saying decades of public health advice was just entirely wrong?
It was a misunderstanding of the mechanisms. Early on, researchers saw cholesterol in the arterial plaque and logically assumed that eating cholesterol caused the plaque.
It sounds like a reasonable assumption to make at the time.
It does. But it took decades of more nuanced metabolic research to realize that the primary dietary driver of blood cholesterol is not dietary cholesterol at all. The body is highly regulated. If you eat a bit more cholesterol, your liver senses that and simply produces a bit less to maintain balance.
So what is the real driver?
The real dietary drivers are saturated fats and trans fats.
How does eating saturated fat translate into more LDL vehicles in the blood if it isn't cholesterol itself?
It changes the way your liver behaves. Your liver has specific receptors on its surface. You can think of them like little docking stations that pull circulating LDL vehicles out of the bloodstream to clear them away.
Okay, docking stations for the vehicles.
Right. When you consume high amounts of saturated fat, it actually causes your liver to downregulate or reduce the number of those docking stations.
I see. So it shuts down the docks.
Precisely. With fewer docks available to clear the traffic, more LDL vehicles remain trapped, circulating in your bloodstream, increasing the chance they crash into the artery wall.
That actually makes sense. So the egg itself isn't the villain, but frying it in heavy butter alongside bacon changes the equation entirely because of the saturated fat.
That is a perfect way to summarize it.
And that brings up the issue of natural foods. There is this modern trap we fall into where we assume if something is marketed as natural, ancestral, or clean, it must be perfectly healthy for our hearts. Coconut oil is a massive one. It is heavily marketed as a superfood.
That is a very persistent trend. But biological reality does not care about marketing labels. Natural does not automatically mean cholesterol-friendly.
Tell me more about the coconut oil trap.
Well, coconut oil is extraordinarily high in saturated fat. It is actually even higher than butter. Because of that dense saturated fat content, it consistently downregulates those liver receptors and raises LDL levels in the blood.
So leaning heavily on those types of fats is counterproductive if your goal is clearing LDL vehicles.
Absolutely.
So if we want to add more docking stations and clear out the vehicles, what should we actually be eating?
You want to focus on foods that actively help your body eliminate cholesterol. Specifically, soluble fiber. Foods like oats, beans, lentils, and certain fruits are rich in soluble fiber.
How does fiber actually lower cholesterol? I always thought fiber was just for digestion.
It is a brilliant biological mechanism. Soluble fiber binds to those cholesterol-rich bile acids in your digestive tract. Instead of your body reabsorbing that bile and reusing it, the fiber traps it.
And forces it out of your body as waste.
Exactly. Because your liver just lost its supply of bile, it has to pull cholesterol out of your bloodstream to manufacture more. It literally forces your body to consume its own circulating cholesterol.
That is a useful way to look at it. You are forcing the liver to use up the extra cargo. But it is not just about the food entering the body, is it? It is also about the state of the machine processing that fuel.
That is a crucial part of the puzzle.
If someone is sitting at a desk all day, barely moving, and slowly gaining fat around their internal organs, that must worsen the entire situation. That sounds familiar, actually. It connects directly to what we talked about in Why You Are Not Losing Weight, where the focus was on how the body's overall metabolic environment and insulin resistance completely shift how we process energy.
I agree completely, and the connection is vital. When you develop insulin resistance from poor sleep, chronic stress, and a sedentary lifestyle, it changes the actual physical shape of your cholesterol vehicles.
Wait, the shape changes.
Yes, the LDL particles tend to become smaller and much denser.
Why does the size of the vehicle matter?
Because smaller, denser LDL particles are far more likely to penetrate the delicate lining of your arteries and get stuck. A larger, fluffier particle might bounce off the wall, but the small, dense ones slip right through.
That explains a lot.
So even if your total amount of cholesterol hasn't changed drastically, the metabolic dysfunction has made the vehicles themselves much more dangerous. Regular physical activity helps reverse this by improving insulin sensitivity and keeping the particles larger and less likely to crash.
And that covers the lifestyle piece, diet, movement, metabolic health. But we cannot ignore the blueprint we are born with. Some people seem to do everything wrong and have perfect arteries, while others eat salads, run marathons, and still get terrible lab results.
That is a crucial point, because genetics play a massive and often ignored role in lipidology. There are inherited genetic conditions like familial hypercholesterolemia.
That sounds intense. What does that actually mean for the patient?
In these cases, a genetic mutation means the liver simply does not build enough of those LDL docking stations from birth. Their LDL levels are dangerously high regardless of what they eat.
So for them, it really is a biological reality, not a willpower issue.
Exactly. There's also a specific genetic marker called lipoprotein A, or LPA. You can think of LPA as a particularly dangerous type of LDL vehicle that has a sticky protein attached to it.
Like Velcro.
Yes, exactly like Velcro. It is highly prone to getting stuck in the artery walls and causing rapid plaque buildup. Your LPA levels are almost entirely determined by your genetics, not your lifestyle.
That is incredibly important to know.
It really is. Knowing these genetic factors exist is so important because it removes the unnecessary guilt and shame people feel when their labs come back poorly despite their best efforts.
With genetics, insulin resistance, and diet all playing these interconnected roles, tracking our true risk becomes incredibly important. But when people get a standard blood test, they often just obsess over one big number at the top of the page, which is total cholesterol. Why is looking at that single number a mistake?
Because total cholesterol lumps the entire highway system together into one vague metric. You might have a high total number simply because your HDL, those are the vehicles returning cargo to the liver, is very high.
And that is generally a protective state, right?
Yes, it is. Conversely, you might have a technically normal total number, but a dangerous hidden surplus of those small, dense LDL particles we talked about earlier.
So what should we actually be looking for on that piece of paper?
You need to look at the full pattern. You need to look at the LDL, the HDL, the triglycerides, which are a different type of fat related to energy storage, and particularly something called non-HDL cholesterol.
Non-HDL, what exactly does that measure?
Non-HDL is simply your total cholesterol minus your HDL. It gives you a single number that represents every single potentially harmful vehicle carrying cholesterol in your blood. It is a much more accurate predictor of risk.
And this isn't just a conversation for people entering their 50s and 60s, right? I imagine if plaque buildup takes decades, the process starts much earlier.
It starts much earlier than most people realize. Plaque can begin forming in childhood.
Wow, in childhood.
Yes, that is why routine screening is actually recommended for children, typically once between the ages of 9 and 11, and again between 17 and 21. The longer a dangerous lipid pattern goes unrecognized, the more time that inflammatory plaque is to silently build up.
That is a huge shift in perspective. But naturally, when people realize they have a silent, decades-long problem to manage, they immediately look for a quick fix, and the market is more than happy to provide one.
There is an entire industry built on that instinct.
Right. There is an entire aisle at the pharmacy dedicated to heart health supplements. What is the reality behind things like plant sterols, omega-3s, or red yeast rice? Are they a viable shortcut?
We have to look at the supplement aisle with heavy skepticism,
Mm.
because it is an area where a lot of hope is sold, but the biology often does not match the marketing. Let's break those down. Plant sterols actually do have a modest, measurable effect.
Really? How do they work?
As we discussed with fiber, sterols have a molecular structure very similar to human cholesterol. When you eat them, they compete with cholesterol for absorption in your gut. They essentially take up the seats on the bus, so a portion of your actual cholesterol gets blocked and leaves the body as waste.
Okay, so sterols have some real biological mechanism. What about omega-3s? You see fish oil marketed everywhere with a giant heart on the bottle.
Omega-3s are widely misunderstood. Over-the-counter fish oil is not an effective tool for lowering your LDL cholesterol. In fact, in some cases, it can slightly raise it.
Wait, it can raise your LDL?
Yes, it can. There are purified, prescription-grade omega-3 medicines, but those are specifically designed and prescribed to lower very high triglycerides, not LDL. Supplement marketing constantly blurs that distinction.
That is an important clarification to make. People are swallowing handfuls of fish oil capsules thinking they are clearing out their LDL vehicles.
And they are doing no such thing.
Then you have red yeast rice, which is always positioned as the gentle, natural alternative to pharmaceuticals.
Red yeast rice is particularly tricky. It sounds like a harmless, holistic remedy. But the reason certain red yeast rice products successfully lower cholesterol is that they contain a specific compound called monocolin K.
Monocolin K, what does that do?
Biologically, monocolin K is identical to the active ingredient in a prescription statin drug.
So it isn't an alternative to a drug, it literally is an unregulated drug.
Precisely. And because it is unregulated, the amount of that active compound can vary wildly from one batch to the next. One bottle might do nothing, and the next might give you a massive pharmaceutical dose.
That sounds incredibly risky.
It is. Furthermore, contamination with harmful byproducts during the fermentation process is a real documented concern. It is absolutely not a harmless shortcut. The harsh reality is that many supplements are oversold.
Even if they change your numbers a bit.
Even if they nudge a lab number slightly, that is not the same thing as providing proven real-world protection against a cardiovascular event.
If supplements are mostly hype, and a perfect lifestyle cannot always override our genetic blueprint, what happens when we need real medical intervention? Because when lifestyle isn't enough, the conversation inevitably turns to statins.
Statins are a very heated topic.
They really are. And the way statins are discussed today is deeply polarized. They are either portrayed as toxic poisons pushed by a corrupt medical industry, or as magic pills that let you eat whatever you want without consequence.
Social media thrives on simple villains and miracle fixes. But human biology requires nuance. Statins are among the most rigorously studied medicines in human history.
How do they actually work inside the body?
They work by inhibiting an enzyme in the liver called HMG-CoA reductase. By blocking this enzyme, statins partially shut down the liver's internal cholesterol factory.
And if the liver can't make its own cholesterol, what does it do?
It panics, essentially.
Yeah.
To get the cholesterol it needs for basic functions, the liver dramatically increases the number of those LDL docking stations on its surface.
So it pulls massive amounts of circulating LDL vehicles out of the bloodstream.
Exactly. For people with high cardiovascular risk, existing heart disease, or genetic conditions, this mechanism significantly reduces the risk of heart attacks and strokes. They are highly effective.
But they are not magic pills.
No, they are not. You cannot outmedicate a biological environment built on insulin resistance, a sedentary routine, and poor sleep.
That is a great point.
And like all medications, statins come with potential side effects, such as muscle aches or slight increases in blood sugar for certain individuals. For some people, these side effects require adjusting the dose or exploring alternative medications entirely.
So it requires a much more grounded approach than just demanding a pill or refusing one out of fear.
It requires an honest, ongoing conversation with the doctor. You have to weigh the proven statistical benefits of reducing your risk against the potential downsides.
Real cholesterol management is not flashy.
It isn't. It is about understanding your unique biological risk, making those unglamorous but highly effective daily lifestyle choices, and utilizing medication appropriately when your biology demands it to protect your long-term health.
That brings a tremendous amount of clarity to a topic that usually just generates anxiety. When you step back and look at the cellular mechanics of it all, the perspective really shifts. Cholesterol is not a poison trying to destroy us from the inside out.
Not at all.
It is a fundamental, vital piece of our biological architecture.
Precisely.
It keeps us functioning. It just requires the right environment to stay balanced, and sometimes our genetics or our modern habits disrupt that environment.
That is the key point to remember. The goal is never to obsess over a single number on a page or panic over an egg yolk.
Right.
The goal is to understand how your body actually processes fuel, track your true risk over time, and take evidence-based, sustainable steps to keep the system running smoothly.
It leaves you with a really profound evolutionary thought to ponder. Think about our ancient ancestors, enduring famines and surviving harsh climates. The very substance their bodies aggressively held onto in order to build strong cells and survive is the exact same substance we now have to actively manage and medicate against.
That is a fascinating way to look at it. Biology is always about context.
Our biology hasn't changed at all, but our modern environment, our desk jobs, our processed diets, and our incredibly long lifespans has changed so drastically around us that a survival mechanism has become a modern liability.
Thanks for listening to TalkKast.